The candlelight flickered in the dimly lit corridors of Hogwarts, casting soft, wavering shadows along the cold stone walls. Outside, the autumn wind carried with it whispers of old legends, rustling through the towering turrets and spiraling staircases. The great hall, with its enchanted ceiling reflecting a sky of rolling gray clouds, felt even more grand tonight. Tonight, when history was about to be revisited. For centuries, the Triwizard Tournament had been a spectacle of skill, bravery, and danger, a competition that united the three great wizarding schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. But long before Harry Potter's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, before Cedric Diggory's fate was sealed in the graveyard, there was a first, a time when the tournament was born, raw and unrefined, when the stakes were not just glory, but survival itself. Few at Hogwarts still remembered the true origins of the Triwizard Tournament. The records were faded, the memories whispered from one generation to the next, like myths. But tonight, under the watchful eyes of ancient portraits and the gentle hum of magic in the air, the truth was ready to be unveiled. A gathering of students had formed near the fire in the Gryffindor common room. They were eager for a story, one filled with daring champions, arcane magic, and trials that pushed young wizards and witches to the edge of their abilities. An elder professor, one who had spent decades studying the history of wizardry, leaned forward, his gaze lost in the flames, as if the very essence of the past was flickering within them. "The first Triwizard Tournament," he began, his voice steady but distant, "was not like the one you know today. It was not about points or trophies or international friendships. It was a test of survival, one that many did not live to tell. Let me take you back to the time when three schools gathered for the first time, and when a dark shadow loomed over their trials." The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if leaning in to listen. A story was about to be told, one that had remained buried in the archives of Hogwarts, hidden beneath layers of rewritten history. And as the professor's voice wove the past into the present, the students found themselves drawn into a world where magic was unrestrained, alliances were fragile, and the very first tournament held secrets darker than they had imagined. And so, the tale of the first Triwizard Tournament began. As the fire crackled in the Gryffindor common room, the students leaned in, their eyes wide with anticipation. The professor took a slow breath, his fingers tracing the spine of an ancient, worn-out book that rested on his lap. "To understand the first Triwizard Tournament, you must first understand those who dared to enter it," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of history. He turned the pages, revealing sketches and names lost to time. Three champions from three great schools, each of them a legend in their own right, though history has faded their names from common memory. Tonight, I will bring them back to life. The first name glowed under the candlelight: Elias Ravenshade, the chosen champion of Hogwarts. A talented duelist, known for his sharp intellect and unwavering determination. He was a seventh-year student from Ravenclaw, a wizard who had spent years perfecting both offensive and defensive magic. unlike others who had been eager for fame, Elias entered the tournament not for glory, but for knowledge. He had always been drawn to ancient magic, to the untamed spells hidden deep within Hogwarts' history. His dark hair and piercing blue eyes often carried a look of deep contemplation, as if he saw more than what was in front of him. Elias believed magic was a force beyond rules. He sought to understand it in its rawest form, no matter the cost. Perhaps that was why he was willing to enter a tournament that even professors feared. The professor turned the page, revealing another name, Celeste d'Amour, the shining star of Beau's Batons. She was elegance personified, a witch whose magic flowed as gracefully as a ballroom waltz. With golden curls cascading down her shoulders and an air of quiet confidence, Celeste was admired by her peers, but few knew of the fire that burned within her. She did not enter the tournament for fame or fortune. She entered because she had something to prove. In a world where her school was often underestimated, Celeste wanted to show that Beauxbaton's witches were not fragile butterflies, but forces of nature. Her wand work was as precise as her words, and her dueling skills, though rarely showcased, were deadly when necessary. Celeste's magic was beauty in motion, but do not mistake grace for weakness. When the tournament began, she would prove that elegance could be just as dangerous as brute strength. Finally, the professor's fingers rested on the last name. Magnus Volkova, the champion of Durmstrang. A formidable wizard with a reputation for fearlessness, Magnus was the embodiment of raw power. Towering over his peers, with a physique forged through rigorous training, he was a warrior at heart. Unlike Elias, who sought knowledge, and Celeste, who sought respect, Magnus entered the tournament because he thrived on the thrill of battle. His magic was aggressive, precise, and ruthless. With his short auburn hair and sharp, stormy gray eyes, he carried the weight of Durmstrang's reputation on his shoulders. He did not fear pain, nor did he fear the unknown. He only feared weakness. For Magnus, the Triwizard tournament was not just a competition, it was a battlefield, and on the battlefield, there was only victory or defeat. The professor shut the book gently, looking up at the students before him. 3 champions, 3 different reasons for entering, but none of them knew what awaited them when they stepped into the tournament. None of them knew that this was not just a test of skill, but of survival. The room remained silent, the flickering fire casting long shadows against the walls. The story was only just beginning. The great hall of Hogwarts shimmered with an air of excitement and unease. The enchanted ceiling above reflected a stormy night, the moon barely visible through the swirling gray clouds. Students whispered among themselves, eyes fixed on the golden goblet of fire that stood in the center of the hall, its blue flames licking the air, waiting to choose the champions who would partake in the very first Triwizard tournament. It had been centuries since this ancient competition was first conceived, an event meant to foster unity between the great wizarding schools of Hogwarts, Beau's Batons, and Durmstrang. But this was no ordinary tournament. The first of its kind was still untested, unpredictable, and whispered to be the most dangerous of them all. Professor Everard Grimshaw, An aging yet formidable wizard stood before the goblet, his deep voice echoing across the hall. The champions shall be bound by magic itself, their fates intertwined with the tournament's trials. The goblet of fire will not only choose the best among you, it will test your very will to survive. Silence fell as the goblet flickered wildly, and then, in an instant, it spat out the first name. Elias Ravenshade. Gasps rippled through the hall. The Ravenclaw's seventh year stepped forward with measured grace, his expression unreadable. Elias had entered the tournament with the curiosity of a scholar, seeking to unravel its magical depths. Yet, as he reached for the parchment bearing his name, a cold sensation crawled up his spine, a whisper at the edge of his consciousness, as if the goblet itself had spoken to him. Then the flames blazed again. Celeste d'Amour! Beauxbaton's students clapped, though their applause was tinged with nervous energy. Celeste walked forward with the poise of a queen, her shimmering blue robes catching the candlelight. She met Elias's gaze briefly before turning to the goblet, but like him, she too felt something strange, a brief, fleeting pulse of ancient magic, as if something within the goblet had stirred to life. Then, the final name emerged, Magnus Volkova. The Durmstrang students erupted in cheers as Magnus strode forward, his every step exuding raw confidence. He took the parchment from Professor Grimshaw's hand, but the moment his fingers touched it, the castle trembled. The enchanted candles flickered violently, and a gust of wind rushed through the hall, though all doors remained shut. The goblet's blue flames turned black. A shudder ran through the crowd as the fire roared with unnatural force. The professors exchanged wary glances, wands subtly drawn beneath their robes. But before anyone could react further, the goblet expelled one final parchment, one that no one had placed inside. It drifted through the air, landing softly at Grimshaw's feet. The moment he picked it up, a chill spread through his fingers, creeping up his arm like frostbite. His eyes widened. There was no name, only two words, written in jagged, unfamiliar ink, the fourth champion. A murmur of confusion broke out. There had never been a fourth champion in the history of the Triwizard tournament. Even the goblet itself should not have been able to produce an additional name once three had been chosen. Elias narrowed his eyes at the parchment. Celeste glanced at the professors, searching their expressions for answers. Magnus merely scoffed, arms crossed as he studied the goblet, unimpressed. Then something shifted. A whisper slithered through the hall, a voice that came from nowhere and yet everywhere at once. The very walls of Hogwarts groaned, as if the castle itself was awakening from a long slumber. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the stone walls, and for a moment, every torch in the great hall flickered out. A voice, ancient and hollow, spoke. The tournament has begun. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the eerie presence vanished, the candles relit, the shadows returned to their normal forms, and the goblet's flames resumed their blue glow. But the unease remained. Professor Grimshaw turned to Headmaster Aldrich Hawthorne, whose normally unshakable demeanor had grown stiff with suspicion. Grimshaw hesitated before addressing the crowd. It seems We have a mystery before us, but fear not. The champions will proceed with their preparations, and the first task will take place in 2 weeks' time. The students whispered among themselves as they were dismissed, but for Elias, Celeste, and Magnus, this was no longer just a tournament. Something was watching them. That night, the 3 champions met in secret within the abandoned arithmancy classroom, its towering bookshelves covered in dust, forgotten tomes stacked haphazardly on ancient wooden desks. The dim candlelight flickered as Elias spread the parchment on the table. "The 4th champion," he murmured, "but there's no name." "It must be a mistake," Celeste said, though doubt laced her tone. "Perhaps the goblet malfunctioned." "The goblet does not malfunction," Magnus interrupted, his arms crossed. "It is bound by powerful magic, older than any of us." Elias tapped his fingers against the parchment. Then what if someone interfered with it? What if this wasn't supposed to happen? Celeste frowned. "You mean dark magic?" Magnus leaned forward. "Or something older." Silence settled between them. Then Elias turned the parchment over, examining its surface under the candlelight. His sharp eyes caught something, the faintest trace of a symbol, nearly invisible to the naked eye, a mark, one he had seen before. His heartbeat quickened. He reached for his wand, muttering a revealing charm under his breath. The moment the spell connected with the parchment, a sudden force exploded outward, knocking over books and extinguishing the candles. The room was plunged into darkness, and in that darkness they heard it, a distant voice, a whisper, curling through the air, filled with an ancient hunger. "The tournament has begun, and so has the hunt." Elias, Celeste, and Magnus froze. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The first Triwizard tournament was no longer a competition, it was a trap. The days following the goblet's unexpected declaration of a 4th champion were filled with an unsettling tension that clung to the air like a thick fog. Elias, Celeste, and Magnus tried to carry on with their tournament preparations, but an unshakable feeling of being watched followed them wherever they went. The mystery of the parchment with no name weighed on them, but what was worse, no one in authority seemed willing to discuss it. The headmaster, Professor Aldrich Hawthorne, simply reassured the school that the tournament was proceeding as planned, while Professor Grimshaw's sharp gaze flickered with something unreadable whenever the topic arose. The students whispered among themselves, and even those who weren't superstitious couldn't deny the way the castle felt different. Then, the first task arrived. The arena had been set up on the grounds near the Black Lake, a massive, circular battleground surrounded by towering stone pillars enchanted with ancient runes. Thousands of spectators filled the stands, their excited chatter ringing through the cold autumn air. Students waved banners for their champions, cheering them on, unaware of the darker forces at play. The task was simple in design, but treacherous in execution. Each champion had to retrieve a magical artifact hidden deep within an enchanted maze, guarded by creatures from all 3 competing schools. A test of courage, wits, and spellcasting skill. Elias, Celeste, and Magnus stepped onto the stone platform, their wands at the ready. The Goblet of Fire's choices stood strong and prepared, but as the final countdown began, something unexpected happened. The air itself changed. A pulse of magic surged through the arena like a silent tremor. The crowd didn't seem to notice, but Elias felt it in his bones. The runes on the stone pillars flickered, just for a moment, but he saw it. Celeste clutched her wand a little tighter, her eyes darting to Elias, as if she, too, sensed something was amiss. Magnus rolled his shoulders, but even his usual confidence felt forced. Then, the horn sounded. The three champions dashed into the maze, its towering hedges shifting and twisting behind them, sealing their paths. Each of them moved swiftly, casting tracking spells to navigate the ever-changing labyrinth, their minds focused on their task. But as Elias turned a sharp corner, he froze. There, in the distance, stood a fourth figure, a cloaked figure, its presence blurred at the edges, as though it wasn't entirely solid. The figure stood motionless, and though its face was obscured by the hood, Elias knew it was watching him. "Who are you?" Elias whispered, his grip on his wand tightening. No response. The figure raised a hand, and suddenly, the ground beneath Elias shifted. A blast of wind roared through the maze, and the very walls moved, changing their positions at unnatural speed. The carefully laid paths twisted wildly, separating the champions, turning the challenge into something far more dangerous. This was not part of the task. Celeste, deeper in the maze, stumbled as the ground beneath her rippled unnaturally. She barely caught herself before rolling to the side as a jagged root burst from the earth where she had stood. This was no mere magical obstacle. Someone, or something, was interfering. Magnus, meanwhile, found himself at a dead end, the hedge walls pressing in on him as if they were alive. He slashed his wand through the air, muttering a severing charm, but instead of cutting through, the vines absorbed the spell. Elias barely had time to process what was happening before a deep, inhuman growl echoed through the maze. It was not the growl of a creature he had ever heard before, not a werewolf, nor a troll, nor even the dangerous magical beasts they had been warned about. It was something older, something that did not belong in this world. And then it attacked. A shadowy force lunged at Elias, its form shifting like a wraith, yet striking with the weight of something solid. He barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the creature's dark claws ripped through the hedge wall like parchment. Elias scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. This wasn't part of the task. "Lumos Maxima," he shouted, sending a blinding burst of light into the air. The creature recoiled, hissing, its form flickering, as if struggling to stay in this world. Celeste, seeing the flare of light, sprinted toward it, while Magnus, still trapped in his shifting maze, slammed his shoulder against the hedge, breaking through by sheer force. They reached Elias just as the creature lunged again. Magnus reacted first, hurling a blast of fire from his wand. The flames struck the shadow, but did nothing. The creature passed through them, its hollow, whispering voice growing stronger. Then, Elias did something instinctive. He pointed his wand at the ground and spoke in an old tongue, a phrase that came to him without knowing how. ex mora vincere. The ground beneath them flared with ancient symbols, and for a moment the creature hesitated. It shrieked as if in pain, its form unraveling before their eyes. The wind howled, and in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. Silence fell. The three stood there, breathing heavily, looking at each other. "What in Merlin's name was that?" Magnus muttered, shaking the dust from his sleeves. Elias stared at the scorched ground, the sigils still faintly glowing before fading into nothingness. He didn't know, but more than that, he didn't know how he had known the words. Celeste bent down, brushing her fingers over the spot where the creature had disappeared. Her expression was grim. That thing, it didn't belong here. Elias clenched his fists. It was never supposed to be part of the tournament. The realization settled over them. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had let it in, and whoever they were, they had just sent a warning. The first Triwizard tournament was no longer just a test of skill. It was a trap. The air inside the maze had not settled since the appearance of the shadowy creature. A silent tension lingered, as if the very walls of the labyrinth had absorbed the terror of what had just transpired. Elias, Celeste, and Magnus stood together, their breathing heavy, their minds reeling from the unnatural encounter. The tournament had turned into something far more sinister, and though they had managed to repel the unknown entity, they knew this was only the beginning. The three champions emerged from the maze much later than expected, their expressions grim. The judges and spectators erupted in cheers, believing they had completed their task. The Hogwarts headmaster, Aldrich Hawthorne, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with pride. Yet when he saw their faces, his smile faltered. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm but probing. Elias hesitated. Celeste and Magnus exchanged a glance, knowing they should speak up, but something held them back, a force pressing against their minds, warning them. "The maze was difficult," Celeste finally said, her tone neutral. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment before nodding. "That is the nature of the tournament. You have done well. The second task will take place in 3 weeks. Rest while you can." The moment they left the judging platform, Elias exhaled sharply. "Why didn't we say something?" he muttered under his breath. Magnus, always the brashest of the three, clenched his fists. "Because something didn't want us to." The realization settled uncomfortably between them. A presence, something unseen, had nudged them into silence, and that was more terrifying than the creature itself. Determined to find answers, Elias and Celeste spent the next few days buried in the castle's library, poring over ancient texts about magical creatures, dark entities, and past tournaments. One evening, as Celeste traced her fingers along the spine of a particularly old tome, the candle beside her flickered violently, though there was no draft. She glanced at Elias, whose own candle wavered unnaturally. "Something's here," she whispered. Elias slowly closed the book he had been reading. His wand was already in his hand, though he dared not use it yet. Then the whispering began. At first, it was distant, like wind through cracks in the stone, but soon it grew louder, a voice, fragmented and desperate. "They are watching. It was never meant to be." The words sent a shiver down Celeste's spine. Elias took a step toward the nearest shelf, his instincts sharp. "Who's there?" he called. The library seemed to exhale. The shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, and in the dim light, the bookshelves seemed taller, more menacing. Then the voice whispered one final phrase before vanishing into the stillness. The second task: beware the lake. The silence that followed was suffocating. Celeste looked at Elias. They had been warned. The following morning, Magnus joined them in their search. He had never been one for books, but even he knew the tournament had taken a turn that no one else seemed to acknowledge. The lake, Magnus mused, flipping through an old parchment. That's where the second task is taking place, isn't it? Elias nodded, his gaze sharp. And if that thing from the maze wasn't part of the tournament, what if something else isn't supposed to be in the lake? Celeste placed a hand on the open book before her. It was an account from a Triwizard tournament, centuries ago. This says there was once a task involving a cursed object hidden in the lake, she said, her voice quiet. The champions were told to retrieve it, but one of them never returned. Magnus leaned forward. What happened to them? Celeste hesitated, reading further. They were found, but they were changed. They spoke of whispers in the dark, of something waiting beneath the waves. And then she trailed off. Then what? Elias pressed. Celeste swallowed. Then they disappeared completely. Just gone. A heavy silence followed. Elias shut the book. We need to be ready. We can't let this tournament claim us. Magnus smirked, though there was little humor in it. Then let's make sure we don't end up like them. Celeste closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the unseen threat pressing upon them. The tournament had begun as a test of skill. Now, it felt more like a battle for survival, and the real enemy had yet to reveal itself. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the Hogwarts grounds as Elias, Celeste, and Magnus slipped out of the castle under the cover of darkness. Their footsteps were muffled against the damp grass as they made their way toward the Black Lake, its waters still and quiet, yet holding an unsettling presence beneath the surface. They had agreed if the second task was going to take place in the lake, they needed to understand what lay beneath it before stepping into the unknown. Are we sure about this? Celeste whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Do we have a choice? Magnus muttered, his wand gripped tightly. That thing in the maze, the voices in the library, someone is hiding something, and if we wait for the task, we'll be walking straight into their trap. Elias exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He knew Magnus was right. Waiting meant playing by the rules of the tournament, but the tournament had already proven that not everything was as it seemed. Fine, Elias said, nodding. We need to see if there's anything beneath the lake that shouldn't be there. Celeste sighed, but she knew there was no stopping them now. With a flick of her wand, she whispered, Lumos, and the tip of her wand illuminated the rocky shoreline. They stood at the water's edge, the surface shimmering under the glow of the stars. Elias pulled out a small vial from his pocket. Inside, the liquid swirled with a faint greenish glow. Gillyweed, he said, handing a portion to each of them. Celeste frowned. You stole it from the greenhouse, didn't you? Elias smirked. Borrowed. Magnus rolled his eyes. Just drink it. One by one, they swallowed the plant, feeling the strange sensation of gills forming along their necks. Within moments, their hands and feet webbed, and without further hesitation, they plunged into the lake's cold depths. The world beneath the surface was silent, save for the distant hum of unseen creatures moving in the darkness. Long strands of kelp swayed with the currents, wrapping around their arms as if trying to pull them deeper. Magnus gestured ahead, pointing toward a faint glow that pulsed from below. Elias motioned for them to follow, and together they swam downward. The deeper they went, the colder the water became. As they neared the glowing source, Celeste's breath caught. There, half buried in the lake bed, was a massive, ancient stone slab. Symbols had been carved into its surface, their edges worn by time, but still faintly pulsing with an eerie blue light. Blue. Magnus swam closer, running his fingers over the markings. It wasn't just any stone, it was a seal. Celeste turned to Elias, her expression urgent. "We shouldn't be here. This is ancient magic, something beyond even Hogwarts' protections." Elias hesitated. But why is it here? And why hasn't anyone spoken about it? Magnus gestured to a section of the stone where the carvings had faded. He pointed to one particular marking, a symbol that looked eerily similar to the one they had seen in the maze. Celeste's eyes widened. "This isn't part of the tournament. This is something else entirely." Elias's mind raced. "Then we need to decide. Do we leave it alone or do we figure out what it's hiding?" Magnus, always brash, reached for his wand, but Celeste caught his arm. "No, we don't know what this could do." A moment of silence stretched between them, the water around them feeling heavier, as if something was waiting for their decision. Finally, Elias nodded. "We leave it for now, but we need to find someone who knows what this is." Celeste exhaled in relief, and Magnus gave a reluctant nod. They turned back toward the surface, but as they swam away, the glow behind them dimmed, then pulsed once, as if acknowledging their presence. The lake had given them a glimpse of its secrets, and now it was watching. The moment they broke through the surface and gasped for air, they turned toward the castle, only to find a lone figure waiting for them on the shore. Professor Hawthorne. His eyes were unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. "Out for a swim?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Elias swallowed hard, trying to appear composed. "We were just curious," Hawthorne finished, his gaze flickering between them. "Yes, I imagine you would be." Celeste's fingers tightened around her wand. The professor took a slow step forward. "You have discovered something tonight, haven't you?" No one answered. Hawthorne let out a quiet chuckle. "Curiosity is a powerful thing, but it is also dangerous. Do be careful where it leads you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Elias turned to his friends, his pulse pounding in his ears. "He knows." Celeste exhaled shakily. "Then we need to find out what he isn't telling us." Magnus cracked his knuckles. "Looks like the real tournament has already begun." The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time since the tournament began, Elias felt it. The certainty that they were in far deeper than they had ever imagined. The great hall was eerily quiet, the flickering candlelight casting elongated shadows along the stone walls. Elias, Celeste, and Magnus stood at the far end, their backs pressed against the cold marble of a forgotten archway. The knowledge they had uncovered beneath the black lake weighed heavily upon them, a secret that was never meant to be found. The ancient stone slab, the ominous runes pulsing with magic, and the mysterious Professor Hawthorne's cryptic words, everything pointed to something far greater than a simple tournament. Someone had manipulated the Triwizard tournament to serve a hidden purpose, and now it was time to find out what. Celeste's breath was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched a small parchment in her hands. The writing was faded, but the name on it was unmistakable: Octavius Blackwood, the first tournament champion. "I found this in the restricted section of the library," she whispered. "His victory wasn't recorded properly. There's no mention of a celebration, no accounts of his return home." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Because he never did." Magnus let out a slow breath. So the tournament wasn't just dangerous, it was something else entirely. Celeste nodded grimly. It was a trap. The weight of the words settled between them. The revelation sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The first champion had never been meant to leave. "The final task," Magnus muttered. "What if it wasn't about winning? What if it was about sacrifice?" Celeste ran a hand through her hair. "Think about it. Why would the Ministry allow a tournament so dangerous to continue for centuries? Unless—" Elias finished her thought. "Unless it was serving a higher purpose." The three exchanged looks. "We have to stop it," Magnus said, his voice determined. Elias nodded. "We need proof." But before they could move, the door to the great hall creaked open. A shadow moved in the dim torchlight. Professor Hawthorne stepped forward, his dark cloak swaying as he entered. His gaze, sharp and unreadable, settled on the three students. "I was wondering how long it would take you," he said softly. Celeste took a step back. "You knew." Hawthorne's lips curled in the faintest smirk. "Of course. But tell me, what exactly do you think you know?" Elias stood his ground. "We know the tournament isn't about proving skill or bravery. The first champion never made it out, did he?" Hawthorne chuckled, his expression unreadable. "Octavius Blackwood was the first to step into the final task. And yes, he was the first to disappear." Celeste's grip on her parchment tightened. "Where did he go?" Hawthorne tilted his head. "It isn't a matter of where, it's a matter of what he became." The words sent a chill down Elias's spine. The great hall was cloaked in an uneasy silence, the flickering candlelight casting long, restless shadows along the stone walls. Elias, Celeste, and Magnus stood before Professor Hawthorne, their breaths shallow, hearts pounding. They knew too much now. The Triwizard tournament was never just about skill or bravery. It had been something else entirely, and now they had uncovered its darkest truth. Hawthorne's words still echoed in the cavernous hall. "It isn't a matter of where, it's a matter of what he became." Celeste gripped the parchment in her trembling hands. "Octavius Blackwood never left the final task, did he? He became something else." Hawthorne's gaze was unreadable. The dim torchlight illuminated his features, revealing an expression of both resignation and sorrow. "He became a guardian," he admitted at last. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "A guardian? Of what?" Hawthorne exhaled softly. The final task was never meant to crown a champion. It was meant to create a protector, a soul bound to the tournament itself, ensuring its continuation through the ages. Magnus clenched his fists. That's why no one ever questioned the dangers. It was never about the competitors. It was about feeding the magic that sustains it. Celeste's voice was barely out of a whisper. "And you let it happen." Hawthorne's face darkened. "I never had a choice. None of us do." The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Elias looked toward the towering stone pillars, the history of Hogwarts pressing in on him from all sides. He thought of every champion who had entered the tournament, brave, eager, unaware of what truly awaited them. Celeste swallowed hard. "If we do nothing, it happens again, doesn't it?" Hawthorne nodded solemnly. Magnus took a step forward. "Then we stop it." Hawthorne regarded him carefully. To break an enchantment as ancient as this, it requires sacrifice. Elias looked between his friends, then back at the professor. No one else should have to pay the price. There must be another way. Hawthorne sighed. "There is, but it comes at a cost. The tournament must be rewritten. If the final task is changed, if the magic is unraveled, the curse will end. But the history, the knowledge, everything that makes it what it is will be forgotten." Celeste exchanged a glance with Elias and Magnus. "Then let it be forgotten." Hawthorne gave a solemn nod. "So be it." The following evening, the students gathered in the great hall for what they believed was the final announcement of the tournament. The air was charged with anticipation, yet something had shifted. As Professor Hawthorne took the podium, a strange ripple passed through the castle walls, as if the very foundation of Hogwarts was exhaling a breath it had been holding for centuries. The final task was announced. And this time, it was different. No ancient binding spell, no hidden sacrifices, just a competition of skill, courage, and unity, as it should have been from the start. As the hall erupted into cheers, Elias, Celeste, and Magnus exchanged a knowing glance. The cycle had been broken, and though history would forget the dark secret they had uncovered, the three of them knew the truth. They had changed something far greater than a tournament. They had changed Hogwarts itself. The flickering candlelight bathed the great hall in a golden glow, and for the first time in centuries, the magic of the Triwizard tournament was finally at peace. The fire in the Gryffindor common room crackled softly, its golden glow flickering across the ancient stone walls. The castle, once heavy with secrets, now felt lighter, as if it had exhaled a breath it had been holding for centuries. Elias sat by the hearth, staring into the flames, his mind replaying the events of the past few days. The truth about the first Triwizard tournament, the sacrifice that had kept the magic alive for so long, it had all led them here, to this moment. Beside him, Celeste gently closed a leather-bound book, the old parchment rustling in the silence. "It's strange, isn't it?" she mused, knowing that something so ancient, so powerful, could just fade away. Magnus, stretched out in a chair nearby, smirked. Good riddance, he yawned, stretching his arms. I don't think I could have slept another night knowing the truth. Elias smiled faintly. Well, now you can. The three of them sat in companionable silence, the firelight dancing across their faces. Outside the tower window, Hogwarts stood timeless and unwavering, its towers touching the starry sky. The castle had seen centuries of stories, some dark, some triumphant, but in this moment, it felt like a place of peace. Celeste tucked her knees beneath her chin. Do you think anyone will ever know what we did? Elias thought for a moment before shaking his head. Not in the way we do, but maybe that's all right. He glanced around at his friends. We did what needed to be done, and the castle, it remembers. Magnus let out a slow breath, leaning back in his chair. Then that's enough. The embers in the fireplace shifted, glowing softly like tiny stars. The common room felt warmer, safer, as if Hogwarts itself was watching over them, grateful. The Triwizard tournament would continue, but without its dark past, without its curse. Outside, the wind whispered through the castle walls, carrying with it the echoes of a past that would no longer haunt the present. And as the fire crackled gently, Elias closed his eyes, letting the warmth settle over him. Hogwarts was safe again, and for tonight, all was well.